Welcome to Gritability, a podcast about the power of perseverance, overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to attain the life of your dreams. I am your host, Adam Clausen, and with me here in the studio is my beautiful, talented, unbelievable co-host, Ro Clausen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, today I'm so excited because I get to turn the tables on you and interview you. And I think where we're going to go is we've kind of hinted at and touched upon, or I don't know, maybe verbal vomited, that we are really, really, really into fitness. But we never really touched on how we got into it and kind of how we developed our relationship on the inside and the outside around fitness.
Love it.
Okay, awesome. So why don't you tell me, how did you get into fitness? Was it on the outside? Was it on the inside? Was it a combination of both?
Well, actually, I'm going to back up
Yeah.
because not just inside, outside. I would say, being in my youth, I was very, very athletic. So I got introduced to sports. But to be honest, like I avoided the gym. I remember probably in high school where like I had coaches really pushing, you need to spend more time in the gym. And because I wasn't, I was tall, I was thin, I was strong, but I definitely needed more muscle mass. I wish I would have listened and stepped out of my comfort zone, which was on the court, like the basketball court, soccer field. I was big into martial arts, and those were all basically um, body weight conditioning based, which was good. It was a good foundation. Definitely helped my athleticism. But man, I would have liked to have built some more strength, had some more muscle mass. Like who wouldn't though? What young man doesn't want that? So I avoided that weight room because it was outside of my comfort zone. And looking back, man, because it's such a big part of our lives at this point, I feel like I missed out on that. So I didn't get exposed to weights to a more well-rounded, physical routine until I ended up, unfortunately, in prison. 18 years old, didn't graduate high school. I go off to prison, state prison, rough place. And, that's kind of where I got pushed a little bit more into that weight room. And I remember, working out and being on the basketball court and noticing the difference, like how much stronger I was. And it was seeing those results that inspired me to keep going back, even though I wasn't yet fully comfortable in that place. Um, that was my introduction to it. But I wasn't fully understanding of like the real science behind workout. And this is back, we're talking, I'm going to kind of give my age here. I'm in my late 40s now.
Ish. 40s.
I'm in my later 40s now. So this is back in the 90s, early mid 90s, right? And the science wasn't there like it is now. All of the things that you and I love to geek out about and talk about, health and nutrition and fitness, workout related, that didn't exist. So there was a lot of anecdotal, um, y- you know, evidence out there that was based on bodybuilding and different things. So getting into the weight room, it was kind of me experimenting around, looking at others who I saw there that, were making some gains or were already where I wanted to be physically. So that was my introduction. But to jump ahead, when I got out of prison, I was pretty much committed to it at that point. I said, I know that I need this physical aspect in my daily routine because it's the thing that keeps me mentally balanced. Like I discovered that. I knew there was a correlation there. So I started right away. I signed up for a gym. It was a guy that I got close with who owned the gym, was a runner-up, Mr. New Jersey, big into not only bodybuilding, but he had a boxing gym there too. Boxing gym, wrestling mats. And this is prior to the UFC. which, is right next door to us here, UFC has changed everything. This is still back when, there's bare knuckle brawling. And we had guys coming in there who some were street fighters, some were still competing in like wrestling tournaments that they had back then, kickboxing. So it was fun for me to get into that gym, to be able to hit the weights, work out, go hard, go right next door and spar with these guys. Like, so there was an incentive there, right? Like that was my competition. That's what kept me motivated. Unfortunately, it didn't keep me motivated enough because, as a young man, I was trying to balance both. And I was still under the belief that I could go out and I could drink all night. I could, basically party, show up to the gym the next morning and somehow shake it off and be all right.
Been there.
So you know exactly what I'm talking about. And this was a different era, right? Like that was, to be honest, it was somewhat acceptable. It was socially acceptable. I would pull up. Here was my morning routine. I would wake up about 10:30, 11 o'clock. I would, slam a cup of coffee. I would take my pre-workout. And back then, the pre-workout was, you had ephedrine based. Plus, I was popping a handful of pharmaceutical grade ephedrine on top of it.
A literal handful.
Literal handful. On my way to the gym, I would start shaking and have trouble holding onto the steering wheel. Like that's what it was. And I'm chain smoking cigarettes at the time. I would get out of my truck. I'd have a, pair of Doc Martens on, like cut off fatigues, ball cap, sunglasses, smoking on my way right up to the door because you couldn't smoke in the gym. I mean, this wasn't the 60s or 50s, right? Like this the 90s, they had outlawed smoking in the gym. So I take my cigarette at the door, fling it, and I remember them looking out the window like the trainers are going, what is wrong with this kid? Because I was still a kid. I was 21 years old. And they were a few years older and they were serious. Like they were hardcore fitness. And they're looking at me like, man. And then I'd come in there and I would hit it. I'd hop on the treadmill in boots, sprinting it out for 3 miles. That was my warm up. And then I'd hop into my weights, right? And they'd come over and they'd be like, what are you doing, man? Like, what are you training for? You come in here, you train like a maniac. You go next door, you spar. Like, what's the agenda? What's the plan here? Like, when are you going to clean up the rest of this? We see the other things that you're doing too. I can smell the alcohol just oozing out of you. Like, man, like you could do something with this. And honestly, I didn't see any path forward for me doing that at the time. I already had that criminal conviction and I saw it as a limitation. Like, I can't do this. Like, I am stuck working in the trades in any one of these jobs. There's just no other opportunity for me. And to be honest, at 21 years old, not too many people wanted to give me a chance. And I didn't see the potential of doing something in that space. And it hadn't really evolved. The fitness industry, what we see today, that didn't exist back in the 90s, right? Like you had a couple of personal trainers in the gym, but it wasn't the industry, the thriving industry that it is today, where it's become, just much more common. People are more focused on their health and wellness back then. So that's kind of where I got my start. Where do you want me to go from there?
Well, first of all, I love that you said, would you say camos and Doc Martens? Because I feel like if we saved all of our stuff from the 90s, people now be like, oh, they're the coolest old people. But I love also how you touched on how you would smoke and go to the gym drunk. Been there, done that. I used to be the girl. Well, no, all the girls in my figure competitions, we would go out the back door and smoke our cigarettes before going on stage. It was just very different back then. But we'll get to my story in a minute. So when and how did you discover the difference or get to the point where you worked out or trained like a maniac, smoking and drunk, to training for actual health, wellness, and that version of fitness?
Yeah, because there's distinct differences there, right? Really, what happened was, yeah, all of those other negative habits started to increase in intensity and frequency, and I saw less and less of the gym. The less I saw of the gym, like just the more off track my life went. And although I sensed what was happening at the time, it's one of those things where I could just feel the momentum carrying me in the wrong direction. And I didn't feel like there was anything I could do about it. So I end up, you know, with obviously the 213-year sentence, right? That dramatically changed everything. Even while I was waiting on pretrial, a lot of stress, most stressful time of my life. I was doing a lot of calisthenics every single day, thousands of squats and push ups and sit ups every day. That's not necessarily healthy, but that was the only outlet. I was literally trapped in a cage in this small box, and I had to do something with all of that frustration. And even though I didn't feel like, and I don't now feel like that was necessarily a healthy outlet, it was an unhealthy stress, and it was the only way I could deal with it. I realized that I was still much better off doing things that way as a stress relief, finding greater balance, than I was trying to self medicate with the drugs, with the alcohol, with all of my other negative habits. And although at that point it was too late, right? I was already headed down that path to that 213-year sentence. The realization sunk in, like, I need more of this in my life. So ultimately, when I do get sentenced, I end up finally being moved to a prison, which is a little bit more permanent. There's some space. I can get out into a yard where I can move a little bit, and I can get into a gym. And I end up at the only United States penitentiary in the country at this time that has weights, which, man, that's a big deal, especially if you're on the inside, like to have access to those. But not only did we have weights, we had stability balls, medicine balls of all shapes, sizes, slam balls. Very, very ahead of the time, because Kevin, who became really my first mentor, right? Kevin was a guy who was serving a life sentence, had already been in for some time. The first time I walk in the gym, you can't miss this guy, because he was going through a serious powerlifting phase at the time. He's a big Irish guy, bright red hair and eyes bulging out of his head as he's, doing 500 to 600 pound squats and deadlifts. Like, it was intense. And I'm like, man, clearly this guy is seriously invested in this. But then I saw him also in the gym doing mobility work, doing yoga. He had classes that were based more on flexibility, agility, and stability, all these other aspects that made him much more well-rounded. I'm like, wow, this guy's an athlete too. And I see how he's training these other individuals. I'm like, that's what I need. Like, I need more of that. I want to experience all of that. If I know that this is something that's definitely beneficial and needed, let me go to the subject matter expert. And I feel so incredibly fortunate that he saw something in me and carved out time to give me his attention. But then, even more importantly, prison, like, space is precious, right? Real estate is to have space in prison. Wow, very hard to come by. This guy had some, and he was willing to carve out space and share it, and ultimately give some of that space to me so that I could further explore this evolving passion that I had. I'm discovering that, like, fitness, wow, like, I could spend more time, more energy here. I'm genuinely curious about why these things are working for me, how I can use those to help other people, like, get the same results. Because people are seeing me, I'm in there grinding every day. And I talked about, being face down on the floor, like not even being able to push myself up anymore. I realized that I had the ability to push myself to great lengths, right? And being there in the gym, finding that in myself, having that constructive outlet, wanting to share it with others, him giving me the space to do that, I mean, that was life changing. So, um, that was the first time that I had a focus. I found a passion, and I had a focus for it. So that was the big turning point for me.
I love that. And I want to come back to Uncle Kev. Oh, we could do a whole episode on him, but I want him to come do it in person because we're so close to getting his life sentence overturned. So,
Yes.
okay, but I want to come back to how you guys got separated for a while and then wound up back together years later, because even my journey as far as learning, going from, you know, fitness being all aesthetics and not necessarily healthy, to focusing on stretching and mobility and all of that kind of stuff. And Kev even influenced me when you guys got back together years later. I want you to tell like the water bag story and all of that stuff. But before we get there, let's go back to Allenwood, because you recently, as recent as last week, just told your mom and I the story about how when you were lifting just to gain all kinds of muscle, you got up to like, what was it, 270, 280, something like that? What you were doing to get there, how you felt there, and then how you got back down to where you actually feel comfortable and healthy now.
I'm glad you bring that up, because that goes back to that old mentality. And me being as a younger guy, I was pretty thin, right? So I'm a hard gainer. And it was challenging for me to not just put muscle on, but to put some bulk, to put some size. And I'm in prison with guys who are 300, 350, and they carry it well. Two Samoans that I used to, I'm not going to say I worked out with them, because these guys would throw 405 on the incline bench and bang it out for reps. Ridiculously strong. Believe me, I was not in that league. But I'm looking at these guys going, man, I gotta put a little bit of size on me. And I was doing pretty well at the time. Good strength, decent size. But everyone kept telling me, listen, you're a hard gainer. You know what you do? Just eat everything in sight. So I have guys bringing me from the kitchen stacks this high, 12 to 16 Danishes. And I got a tub of peanut butter, a tub that sits on my desk, and I'd slather each one in peanut butter. And I'd slam the whole rack down, and they're like, go, get another one. And yeah, the thought of it now still turns my stomach. But I thought, as a thin guy, as a hard gainer, that's what I had to do to put on some mass. And I did this for the better part of a year, and I went all the way from probably 210 to 275, in that neighborhood. When I started getting up there, I really stopped checking the weight of how much I weighed, but it was also the strongest I've ever been. So in my mind, I was like, it's working. And I'm getting positive reinforcement. Although the reality is I'm carrying a lot of excess. I had weight, right? I had put on muscle, but I had a lot of excess fat. And I'm looking at it going, man, I've never had this around my midsection. One of the benefits of being on the leaner side was that I'd never really had a lot of fat, excess fat. Here I am now with this whole roll around my stomach, glutes out to here. My legs got really large, and people are like, man, like, what are you doing? Are you juicing? Are you getting something in here? Because it was that dramatic a difference. So all that quote unquote positive reinforcement about the gains that I'm making, and people are seeing like my weights went up dramatically too. Fast forward, takes me, actually what started my transition back was I'm walking up the stairs, one flight of stairs on the housing unit up to my cell. And I catch myself at the top that I'm short of breath. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I was like, no, I used to make fun of people who couldn't get up the stairs without having to stop and catch their breath. I'm in my 20s. Like, what? No, it's not going to happen. And unfortunately, I have family members who have battled with obesity, and it's long-term health complications, right? And I'm like, I'm in my 20s. I'm in prison. If I'm not taking good care of myself, I know that medical's not taking care of me. I know that. I've seen it. I was like, so I need to get back to health, right? It can't just, what I found is this was all about ego. I wanted to look big. I wanted to lift super heavy. I wanted it was more of an image that I was going after, right? Because by this time I had kind of excised all my demons. It started out like that. The gym was a place for me to do that. The mental part, I had already found the balance. Now I'm pushing like physical boundaries that aren't necessarily healthy. Some of my lifts, like when you're struggling to pull almost 600 pounds in a deadlift and your form is not good, you're going to end up with problems. And to be honest, you've seen, I have some of those issues now. Like just putting that kind of weight on your body can have an impact, especially if you're not doing it properly. And again, it was about ego. So I was just worried, more or less. I wasn't focused on the healthy components of it. So I had to make a change. And what that change looked like was over the course of the next year, me trying to get rid of the excess fat, right? I'm like, how do I hold on to this muscle? I don't want to lose these gains. I want to stay strong. I want to be fit. Like I need to be able to get back out on the track. I need to be able to run a full court game instead of just, we're playing half court now, like, cause I can't run the court. I can't breathe. So, it took me a while to transition back down. And what I realized is that all of those fat cells that I had collected, they don't go away so quickly, you know? So it was a challenge for me to figure out, okay, what do I need to do with my nutrition? How do I dial this back? What do I want to cut out? So I had been focused all my, energy on learning more about lifting, the time I'm spending in the gym, different physical exercises. Now I need to transition. I got to learn a little bit more about nutrition. I should have done that on the front half, right? And that's one of the things that I regret. I kind of skipped that step. So as I went back and started learning more and more about nutrition, I said, I could have done this very differently. It might have taken me a little bit longer to put on the lean mass, but it would have benefited me far more long term.
Sure. Okay, so there's so many thoughts going through my head. I was in the same position with bulking and cutting, and I remember there were so many times at the first like real hardcore underground non-conventional gym that I went to. Shout out to Renegade Fitness in Watchung, New Jersey, Jason and Jared Ferrugia. And I remember there were times that it would be like, okay, am I going to be strong and just eat? Or am I going to be fast and light and do all the gymnastic stuff and cut down? So I totally get that. So what tips do you have for the listeners on, like, especially with the ego part of it? Because like you said, you were lifting 600 pounds, and especially in prison, that is bragging rights. So how did you get past the ego of, I'm assuming you were lifting less when you were cutting?
And that was the whole, you're going to see a decrease, right? As your weight drops, you're going to see a decrease. But what I realized was that although I was shedding pounds on myself, it wasn't proportionate to the amount of weight I was still able to lift. Meaning I kept many of the physical strength gains as I dropped the weight. So in my mind, I'm going, okay, like I feel better about this. I'm not sacrificing. I didn't need that excess fat. And when it really occurred to me was, I mentioned basketball. Like we used to play 3-on-3 for money in there. Now, people joke about prison rules. Prison rules is a real thing. You know, it's a whole different sport. I grew up playing competitively in my youth, played in some highly competitive, played Sunny Hill in Philadelphia, some of the top athletes. That's where Kobe Bryant came out of. Some of the top athletes, in the country, and to come into prison where there are some high level athletes in prison. A couple of NFL players that came through and Allen Wood. So the level of athleticism is there, but man, physicality of a whole different level, right? There's no calling fouls, right? There's no fouls, literally, unless there's blood. And even sometimes then they're not respected. So we're playing 3-on-3 for money. And even at when let's say I was about 270, 275, I was still the lightest guy on the court. Lightest, not smallest guy, but lightest guy on the court. And so to be out there competitive, and now I'm dropping weight, to me, that was part of it in my head. Like, hey, how am I going to stack up physically? Am I going to be able to hold my ground? And part of that was where I started getting into, when we talk about fitness, being more well-rounded, coming back to the martial arts, getting rooted. I started focusing more on that component. There was yoga. There were other things involved to where I discovered even at a lighter weight, like I still felt solid. I felt grounded. There were other things that I could do to help with that, where it wasn't just a matter of size, right? I mean, one of my heroes, Bruce Lee, right? Guy was amazing. He was like this big, he weighed 135 pounds.
Is that why you like me so much?
Yes.
I remind you of Bruce Lee?
Yes, Bruce. I mean, you are ripped up just like Bruce Lee. So, and we used to joke about that all the time, being cut up like Bruce. But guys at 135 pounds, amazing strength, like physical prowess. So I said, where is this balance that I'm going to find? So for me, as I'm dropping, I'm, tracking my weights, how much am I giving up here in my max lifts, and, my conditioning's improving. So I'm factoring all these things in, but it's when I get out there on the basketball court and we got money on the line, am I still competitive? Like, am I still the go-to, when that last shot, when it's on the line and all that money's riding, like, can I still come through? And I realized that I could. And for me, that was it. That's where I realized, like, I can keep going on this path. There's a healthier way to do this. I'm not sacrificing. I don't have to give up. So I broke that cycle of bulking and cutting and just made a determination, like, hey, I'm going to live healthy. I'm going to live fit. And it took me a while to carve out, well, what does that look like?
I love that. And I love that you have little check-in points with yourself. I do the same thing. So when I was in my ego about I can't deadlift over 300 pounds anymore, but I can do 7 or 8 dead hang pull-ups. So there's that, there's that balance, and it's easier on the ego. So let's go.
Oh, listen, 7 or 8 dead hang pull-ups. Brag a little.
But you got to be, I know we're name dropping, bragging in this episode. Sorry, guys. But let's go back to Kevin, because I think he was such a huge part of both of our fitness journeys, especially after you moved. Mm-hmm. I would get books in the mail. This is running form, and this is how you do mobility. Like, I don't know. I guess he was listening or watching. I'm not sure. But can you tell the story of how you got separated, back together, and then how you worked out and how he influenced you on the mobility and the recovery part of training as well? Water bags, ice baths inside of prison.
Inside of prison. Don't let me forget the ice bath story, because that's a good one.
Yeah.
So yeah, Kevin and I get separated. Um, Fortunate for him, he gets transferred to a medium security. Fortunate for me, because all of that space that he had carved out, I got to step in and take that over. And as I've mentioned previously on here, that became my identity. I became the fitness guru over the ensuing years by me investing so much time and energy. We had an extensive fitness library with DVDs. Depending on your age, you might know what those are. Uh, we had a DVD library. Paul Check, who was a chiropractor turned physiologist. I mean, just incredible. What drew me to Paul Check was I saw a picture of him standing on a stability ball, unsupported, with 75-pound dumbbells in one in each hand. Now, if you've never stood on a stability ball, that's challenging enough to then figure out how to do it with weights. I've watched this guy jump from the ground up on top of it and balance. I'm like, nobody was doing stuff like that back then. And this guy's doing it at that time. He's in his 50s, maybe almost 60. I'm like, man, that, like, to me, that's the epitome of fitness. Look at Bruce Lee, the things that he was able to do. I'm looking at it on the same level. I'm like, this is next level here. So let me learn, let me watch all of these. Many of them were very, very technical, breaking it down, form, function, technique, all of the textbooks that I could get my hands on. I read them. I went through everything. Anything that I could get them to purchase through the rec department, resources, I kept them coming. We had an extensive fitness library there. I spent a lot of time there learning. And again, I carved out that space, which allowed me to become the fitness guru, certified personal trainer, group trainer, got certified as a Schwinn indoor spin instructor. We had someone from Schwinn come in to train us on the bikes because they bought bikes for the facility. So I got to go through the training, basic stuff like CPR certification. I get all of these things. So I'm acquiring a broader knowledge. And I get to lead all of these classes now. And I'm asked to design additional classes for, the 50 and over population, for those who, are working to rehab because we didn't have a rehab facility there. And we had people who were going out for, reconstructive surgery of sorts. And they're asking me to do the rehab, right? Like legally, I don't think they could do that, but there was no one else to do it there. That was the reality. If I didn't help this person get, retain full mobility, they would have been walking with a limp or had, some sort of infirmity the rest of their life. So there was incentive for me to do it. I felt like that was my contribution giving back. Again, it became my identity. So Kev's gone a couple of years. I get the notice that, about a year into our relationship, hey, there's this opportunity to move to a medium. Wasn't exactly the one that I had been hoping for at that time, but it's amazing how things work out. We don't always get what we want, but we definitely get what we need. And I find out I'm being transferred to McKean, up on a mountain, Western Pennsylvania, 6.5 hours from you, 12 hours from my family in the Midwest. I'm like, how is this beneficial? And you know what they tell me? They go, your buddy McTaggart's there, Kevin. And I'm like, okay,
Send me.
let's go. And when I got off the bus, literally walked out of the door, R&D, there he is. Kev's waiting for me. He says, man, I got you a cell right next to me over in this housing unit. And listen, if you don't know anything about prison, you don't get to pick your cells, right? Like that speaks to the influence that this individual had, how well respected he was by both staff, the population. So I was very fortunate, to end up, even though I had grown quite a bit, I still had so much more to learn. Kev was always one step ahead of me. And, he used to tell me, as you get older, the warm up becomes the workout, where it's much more prominent. When you're younger, you do a 2 to 3 minute warm up and you just go, right? And your body heats up and Your mobility is a little bit better as you get older. You got to spend more time on the mobility. As men, the first place we lose our athleticism is our hips. It's hip mobility. And that's why you see, top level athletes now, they invest the time, the energy, they work with trainers specialized in maintaining mobility. Your strength, it's strength when you get up to a certain level is easier to maintain. Mobility is a little bit more challenging. So that was the next progression in my fitness journey, was to reconnect with Kev, this 5 years later, I guess it was, and where he is now focused on foam rolling, deep tissue, myofascial release. And now I get this whole new education, these additional components. And I'm like, man, this guy just keeps giving. And so fortunate to then be back under his tutelage, guiding me again. And same thing. He was at a point where he wanted to contribute, wanted to share with others, but really looked to me to kind of take the lead on that so that he could focus a little bit more energy on himself and what he was interested in, because that had become part of my purpose. I had become, the fitness guru, and my purpose was to share that passion with others. So I loved doing the classes, creating that competitive atmosphere in prison. And listen, when you have the time and energy to focus that much on your fitness, things can get highly competitive, right? So, and me, as I'm getting older, and I'm leading these classes, like I feel that I have to lead by example. I would never ask someone to do something that I won't do first. So I always had to demonstrate, lead by example. But then I want to be first. Like if I'm leading this class, like I'm going to do it better than anybody else. So that was an incentive for me to stay at a peak level of fitness, to where I had to dial everything in as best I could. All of my daily habits, my sleep, my nutrition, my workouts, my recoveries, like that all had to fit. And contrary to what people, popular opinion about having all the time in prison to do everything you want. Remember, I'm fighting a 213-year sentence. So I'm still working on the legal. I'm doing all of these other things in prison, the education, the legal. I'm facilitating classes. Like my days are full. And our relationship being a priority, working everything else around that. So, fitness, although it's on my list of priorities, it's, how do I carve out time to do this, to maintain at this peak level?
I love that. And I'm going to throw myself all the way under the bus by telling this tiny little story. But my girlfriend, that the boyfriend introduced us, we told the story on the last episode. She calls me one day and she said, this is very early in our relationship. She said, what does this mean to you if I say jail preserves? So I was like, I don't know. Is there like, there's like green Jello? Is it like some sort of jelly that you get in like the prison, what do you call it? Chow hall?
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, my boyfriend said the same thing to me. And that was my exact answer. And she goes, no, jail preserves you. Like when you come out, you look so much younger. And I contributed to that, to all of the taking care of yourself and really focusing on, well, for the people that do it, I should say, the health, the wellness, the mobility, jail preserves. So I'm trying to trademark that phrase, jail jelly, because when people come out of jail, they ate the jelly. They look really good. Leave us with this story because we teased it a couple times. Tell us about the water bags before we go. I'm sorry, the ice bath. The ice bath.
The ice bath.
I keep confusing those two.
No, the ice bath is a great story because, and this was kind of the intersection, and I talk a lot about this, to develop the mental fortitude that it took for me to make it through that 213 years. I credit the time that I spent in the gym. I subjected myself to daily torture, right? And that is what put me in the frame of mind. Like the gains that I made, the things that I was able to accomplish allowed me to believe in myself in a way that otherwise I can't see possible. Because I would set these crazy goals. And for me, I realized early on that I'm the type of person, like, they used to in my youth tell me, like, if you told me I couldn't do something, I'd have to just go do it just to prove to you that I could. So there was a component of that I learned how to tap into that in a more positive and constructive way. So when I was in the classroom, I'm teaching a basic goal setting class. And for me, the easiest way to show the value of goal setting is through physical goals, right? Because they're very easy to track your progress. You have a start date, you have a projected end date. So within the next 30 days, I am going to be able to do this. I can track my progress on a daily or weekly basis. So as I'm explaining this, and I like to use the track that we have on the prison yard, and it's 3 laps equals 1 mile. So I'm giving this whole breakdown of, how to improve your times, and I'm encouraging everyone in this class to commit to coming out there to run 5 miles, because by a quick survey, the majority, like 1 or 2 people in this class of 25, had run 5 miles before. And I told them, I said, here's the simple way of breaking it down. This is how we put this concept, this goal setting concept into practice, into real life, right? So we're going to come out here on Saturday and we're going to run 5 miles together. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to break it down and we're going to support each other in it. So we go out there and we run this 5 miles. And at the end of it, I hadn't, been focused on running for a while. But man, I felt so good. And there was a good portion of the class that when they finished, like, they felt really good. It was such a sense of accomplishment. And I said, well, you want to know the best way to stretch yourself? The coaching technique, right? Double your goal. If you accomplish something, double it. Like, you didn't think that was possible? Great. Double it. You think that's impossible? Prove to yourself that you can do this. So I said, well, 5, let's jump to 10. And I saw the self-doubt creep in. People were like, oh God, I don't think I can do that. And there was a couple people that took some coaching, a little bit of prodding to, maybe touching that ego a little bit to get them to commit and go all in. And so we come out there, and it's a smaller group. The next weekend we do the 10 miles. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to take it to the next level. Anybody that wants to join me, I'm going to come out here and I'm going to run a marathon. And here's how I'm going to do it. Same principles are going to apply. It's just a longer distance, right? The only block, I believe I can physically do this. My conditioning is pretty good. I ran the 10 miles easy. Let me come out here. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run this. Anybody that wants to come out, join me, please come out. The rest of you, I hope you'll come out and support me. So I go out there the following weekend to run this 26.2 miles. And for the second time while I was incarcerated, I'm sorry, I didn't run 26. I stepped it up because I had already run a marathon. I took the 10 to 30. I did 30 miles. So I commit to running 30 miles. And my thing is, if I verbally commit to something, there is nothing that is going to stop me. So I put this out publicly to everybody. Hey, I'm running 30 miles. And it's not that people doubted me. They're like, man, this dude's crazy. Because they knew based on past experience that I was going to go out there and I was going to do it. So I had to go out there and do it. And really what got me through was, as I was working on the second 10, that 20, I was about the 20 point. There was somebody out there who came out and he was like, oh, look at him. Look at him. He's done. He doesn't have much more left in him.
Isn't that the best motivator?
Oh, that was it. And I needed that. I needed that doubt. That's what got me going. So I got pumped up. I finished. But to be honest, by the time I finished, I was physically broken down, lost all my toenails. I had crazy blisters the entire bottom of my feet. I was a wreck. I could barely walk back to the housing unit. But when I get back to the unit, remember Kev lives directly next to me. He has a trash can, one of those giant like outdoor trash cans where the trash, it's been cleaned out, filled up with water and ice. water and ice. This is on the housing unit. How he got all this together, I have no idea. But he's like, I open up the door to my cell and it's sitting right inside my cell. I'm like, oh my God. He's like, get in, man, get in. And I had all I could do to, strip down, get in this thing. And I just sat in there and man, I needed that so badly. And it took me a while to recover. Like my legs were literally shaky, like going down the stairs for like a week, maybe longer. Um, but Kev was right there with me. He had my post workout, he had food, he had a trash can. Like I don't know where he went out and he got this. Um, but it was things like that that I never forgot. He was always there to support me, greatly inspired me. And it's why, to this day, every time, when that phone rings and I see from federal prison, I hope that it's from him. We get a lot of calls from a lot of different people, always eager to hear from him and others. But, it's why I'm fully committed to doing everything that we can at this point to help bring him home because he's helped me and so many other people and really deserves, to have an opportunity to live this life because much of what I've learned about gritability has been through him and his mentorship. And he's, many of the things that I do today are the result of habits that were passed on by him. So I'm incredibly grateful.
Yeah, I didn't expect this episode to go there, but I love that it did. And I think my takeaway from this is find those people and those things that motivate you. Just like you said, it was that guy that said, he can't do it. He's not going to do it. Oh, have I been there? And that is such good fuel. And for me, the day that you ran that 30 miles, I ran the most that I've ever run in my whole life, which I'm not a runner. I don't like to run. And I think I ran 9 that day around this 1 mile lake because by proxy, I was running with you. So find that inspiration. Who are you going to work out for? What are you going to do this for? What's your end goal? I'm going to hand it back to you for the outro because you could do it way better than me.
Oh, yes. And it's been another great episode. Love spending time with you here and especially talking about our passion for fitness. We are your co-host of Gritability, overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds, the power of perseverance. This is our real life story. We will see you right back here on the next episode of Gritability.